Hello, I'm Lori Call with the Boulder Chamber. Thank you for joining us today at our policy roundtable. We'll give it just another minute or so and then formally kick off the program. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're excited to talk with you today about a couple of really important issues facing the voters of Colorado. Today we'll be discussing the Gallagher Amendment and paid medical and family leave. We have a number of different speakers with us today to address those. I would like to begin by thanking our sponsors this afternoon. Without our sponsors, none of this would be possible. Our presenting sponsor is Google. Our gold sponsors are WW Reynolds Companies and Zayo. Our silver sponsor is BTC. And during these challenging times, sponsors are absolutely critical to our organization. So thank you to WW Reynolds, Google, BTC, and Zayo for your support of our advocacy efforts. We will begin our event today with a discussion about the Gallagher Amendment repeal. Reeves Brown of Building a Better Colorado will kick off the conversation in support of the repeal. Then Michael Fields of Colorado Rising will provide his perspective opposing the repeal. After both speakers provide comments, we will take questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to write your questions, and we will ask them of our speakers. I'd like to briefly introduce a couple of my colleagues today. Andrea Menegal, Public Affairs Director of the Boulder Chamber, is with us, and he will be monitoring the Q&A. And then Tyler X is our events manager, and he will be providing technical support as well as recording the event. And so if you are interested in a recording of this, please contact Tyler. We will also be hearing from our CEO, John Teer, briefly. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the event. John, turning it over to you.
Sure, and I will be brief. I got the message. I do want to thank, first of all, just our chamber staff team putting this event together as the policies and the ballot issues were coming forward. This is important conversation, and it's no easy task to bring together these speakers and presenters that we have today. Second, I want to welcome our CAC members, our Community Affairs Council members. This is the time of year when we really dig in. As we prepare for the ballot and for the election, we know that the eyes are on the Boulder Chamber to make sure that our members, our business community, and the community at large understand the position. And so, you know, when we take positions, it has meaning and impact. And so your time and attention to understanding the pros and cons is absolutely critical. And I just thank you so much for the investment of time. And then finally, I welcome members of other chambers from the Boulder County and Broomfield County region, all part of our Northwest Chamber Alliance family. This is a coalition of chambers from throughout Boulder and Broomfield counties that are aligned in addressing our economic conditions. As we know, Boulder does not live, people say we're a bubble, we're not a bubble. We are part of a broader regional economy, and all the challenges we face and all the solutions are regional in nature. And so just really glad to have their participation and partnership, not just on these ballot issues, but in all the partnership we have in many other issues. So welcome. And with that, I'll turn it back to Lori.
Thanks. Again, I'm Lori Call, Senior Director of Policy Programs at the Chamber, and I will be your facilitator for today. If you have questions along the way, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Andrea will be helping monitor that. With that, let's go ahead and get started. As John mentioned, we do have a number of our Boulder Chamber Community Affairs Council members with us today. You should have received an updated meeting invite from Andrea providing Zoom details for our debrief that will immediately follow the policy roundtable discussion. So refer to your calendars for that. And with that, I would like to introduce Reeves Brown of Building a Better Colorado to kick off the conversation in support of the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment. Reeves?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate the invitation. John, Lori, Andrea, Tyler, thank you to the Boulder Chamber for hosting this discussion on these issues that are so important to our state. Just as a matter of clarification, I'm wearing my Building a Better Colorado hat today. So Building Better Colorado is a nonpartisan, non-advocacy group and takes no position on the Gallagher repeal measure. That said, in our statewide conversation last year in 37 communities in which we engaged about 1,800 people across the state, the idea of repealing Gallagher was the preferred policy recommendation that grew out of that, garnering support from about 3/4 of Democrats and 2/3 of Republicans. So broad support for the idea, and similarly reflected broad support in the legislature. So with that, let me see if I can share my screen here, and I will share a couple of slides. Okay, there. So, there. So I'm going to run through these fairly quickly and then turn over to Michael and then entertain some questions. But to understand Gallagher, you have to understand what property taxes are. Property taxes are assessed locally, they're collected locally, they're spent locally, they entirely benefit the funding of local services. And you can see on this chart, fully half of all property tax collections statewide benefit K through 12. It's the local share of the local state partnership to fund K through 12. Counties receive about 1/4 of property taxes, paying for the county sheriff, county roads, county administration, all things county, and special districts receive about 20%. State has no property tax, receives no benefit from property tax. Additionally, you have to understand how property taxes are calculated. The amount of tax you pay, property tax, is simply the assessed value of your property, which is the market value of your property, the base value times the appropriate assessment rate for whatever class of property you have. And you can see on this chart here, we have put the assessment rates for all classes of property in the Constitution in 1982 when we adopted Gallagher. All property in the state, farmland, skyscrapers, all property is taxed at 29% of its total market value, except houses. Houses are uniquely taxed on a formula, which we're going to talk about, which per the Gallagher Amendment are currently taxed at about 7.15%. So you take the market value of your property times the assessment rate, that arrives at the assessed property value, and then you multiply that by the mill levy that the voters approved in your district. Each mill generates $1 of tax for every $1,000 of assessed value. So with that base understanding, Gallagher was referred to the voters in 1982, named after Senator Dennis Gallagher. At that time in 1982, of all property in the state, skyscrapers, farmland, houses, all property in the state, houses constituted about 45% of total value. And the Gallagher Amendment simply said, that's a good ratio, let's keep it forever. And so it froze into our Constitution that houses would forevermore constitute no more or less than about 45% of statewide valuation of all property. And you can see in this chart, going back to after we adopted Gallagher in '82, how much houses have outpaced the growth of everything else in terms of growth and value. Houses in the blue have grown year over year, every year, except for a brief 4-year window during the national subprime mortgage crisis. Outside of that, in every economic upturn, downturn, residential property values have grown. And significantly grown more than all other property that you can see there in the brown. So much so today that houses make up 80% of all the value of property in the state. But when we adopted Gallagher in 1982, we said that's not possible. Houses can only make up 45%. So how does your legislature make 80% equal 45% to comply with your constitutional mandate? Well, you have to go back to our formula. If Gallagher says that all residential property in the state can make up no more than about 45% of total statewide valuation of all property, and yet the market value of houses is growing faster than everything else, the only way to keep houses at 45% is to shrink the assessment rate, how much of each house is actually subject to taxation. And so that's what we've done ever since we adopted Gallagher. We have reduced the assessment rate on houses. Initially, prior to the adoption of Gallagher, 30% of every house was subject to taxation. Upon the adoption of Gallagher, it was dropped to 21%. You can see it stair-step down since then to 7.15% today. The interest in Gallagher is driven in large part by the next 2-year reassessment that will take place in 2021. It's just started in July of this year. It's a 2-year assessment process. And the legislature has to go through that process to determine are houses still at 45%? And if not, how do we have to adjust the assessment rate? And we're expecting, the State Property Tax Administrator's Office is expecting that in 2020, in this 2-year reevaluation, we're going to see houses statewide valued at over $900 billion. It will be an all-time high. Because the current recession is not impacting, it's not decreasing house values. It has slowed for a short period of time. It slowed the sale of houses, but it's not reducing the prices. Whereas commercial property, non-residential property, is actually seeing a reduction in value because of the impact of the recession on businesses and business rental rates. And because houses are so significantly outpacing non-residential property in this 2-year assessment, the State Property Tax Administrator is estimating that we will see upwards of an 18% drop in the residential assessment rate. Again, the actual value of market value of non-residential property is expected to be about $200 billion. The assessed value of that will come in at about $64 billion. Given about a 32% assessment rate, whereas the actual value of houses is expected again to be north of $900 billion. And because of the Gallagher Amendment dictating that the assessed value of houses can only be 45% of total, it will dictate that houses can only be valued at about $52 billion, which will formulaically again force that assessment rate down from 7.15 to under 6%. Again, about an 18 or 19% drop in the residential assessment rate. And this chart just shows how that will impact different counties. Obviously, counties that and special districts that are more heavily dependent on residential property as part of their tax base will be impacted more. So counties like Adams, Chaffee, Elbert, Jefferson, Mesa will see significant impact, reduction in residential property value, because not the property value, but the assessed value because of the drop in that assessment rate per Gallagher. And so that's going to reduce their budgets between 5 and 15%. Counties like Bent or Weld County won't see that much of a drop because Bent is more heavily dependent on agriculture and Weld is more heavily dependent on oil and gas development. That drop in the revenues for counties is really a permanent cut because it takes a statewide vote of the people per TABOR to raise it. It goes down automatically per Gallagher, but it can't go up without a statewide vote of the people, which has never happened. And so local governments will be faced with the same 3 options. They can permanently reduce local budgets to balance their budget. They can go to their voters and ask voters to raise a local mill levy just enough to offset Gallagher's forced reduction in the residential assessment rate and the corresponding reduction in the property tax base. And that's oftentimes what local taxing jurisdictions do. And the sales pitch to the voters is, it won't cost you anything, homeowner, because even though you're going to be paying on more mills, you're paying a lower tax rate on your house, so it doesn't cost you anything. And so oftentimes homeowners vote for that mill levy increase to mitigate the erosion of their tax base per Gallagher. But every other class of property, remember, is taxed at a fixed rate of 29%. So every time that voters vote to raise the mill levy, just enough to offset Gallagher's forced reduction in the residential assessment rate, that's a real tax increase for every other class of property. And so think of small businesses here, and I'll share a chart with you to that effect. The third option counties will have is simply cross their fingers and hope that when the economy recovers, the market value of their houses will grow enough to offset the reduced assessment rate on houses. And that oftentimes happens for some counties that have fast growing market values, such as along the Front Range. But unfortunately, that disadvantages rural communities because they don't see that growth. They suffer the same decline in the statewide residential assessment rate, but they don't see the rebound as much in the market value as much as the metro counties. And finally, I mentioned that increase in the tax burden on businesses. This chart just shows going back to 1983 when we had a 21% residential assessment rate, and nobody anticipated at that time that we would see the growth in population over the next 40 years that Colorado experienced and the subsequent decline in the residential assessment rate. But that's what we've had. In 1983, for every dollar that homeowners paid in property tax in the blue column, businesses paid $1.40. Today, in 2020, for every dollar that homeowners pay in property tax, businesses pay $4 for property tax for the same value of property. And given the current 2-year calculation and the anticipated 18% drop in the residential assessment rate Gallagher will mandate, in 2022, we expect that for every dollar that homeowners pay, businesses will have to pay $5. And so that property tax burden has shifted over time to the point that it's becoming untenable for many small businesses. So in conclusion, the Gallagher Amendment, just because it's in the Constitution, it's a formula in the Constitution, will continue to erode that residential assessment rate and the corresponding tax base that funds all local services. It can never go to zero formulaically, but it can go to 0.0001. And secondly, rural communities quite unintentionally will suffer the most loss of their property tax base because they don't see the rebound in market value of residential property to offset that. And any efforts by local taxing jurisdictions to get voters to raise local mill levies to offset this impact will continue to shift that tax burden to the business community. And finally, because Gallagher is an amendment to our Constitution, only the voters can change this if they want to. The legislature can't do anything about it. And that is why the legislature did refer to the ballot this fall a proposal to repeal the Gallagher Amendment. And all I would say about that is that repealing the Gallagher Amendment, all it does is repeal the formula that formulaically forces down the residential assessment rate. It won't repeal any assessment rates. It won't raise any assessment rates. It won't lower any assessment rates. It won't affect taxes at all. All it will do is stop the formulaic erosion of the residential assessment rate. So with that, Lori, I think that's all I've got to share.
Thanks so much, Reeves. We did get a question from Judy's asking, does any other state have something similar to Gallagher?
No, and I've researched that and I've found nothing, no other state, and I've been told that no other state does, but someone may correct me at some point and find that, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay, great.
Similarly, I should add too that no other state has a TABOR either, and the interaction between TABOR and Gallagher is really what complicates that situation.
Terrific, thank you. And we did also get a question about whether or not you're willing to share slides with the attendees.
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. Absolutely, I'll send that to you afterward, Lori.
Perfect. And actually, if we could ask that of all the speakers, and then Tyler will follow up afterwards to distribute them as a follow-up, as well as a recording for those who are interested. With that, we don't have additional questions for you at this point, Reeves. Michael, do you want to provide your perspective, please?
Sure. Thanks, Lori. Thanks for having me back at the Boulder Chamber. Obviously, a little different circumstances than last time I was there, but hope everybody's doing well. And thanks, Reeves, for doing the heavy lifting on explaining this thing. It is a tough issue for people to understand. And so I appreciate you guys spending the time doing it. You guys are very smart and probably know it already, but it's an interesting conversation with legislators and across the state with voters. So I think the biggest thing when you look at the repeal of Gallagher is that the assessment rate is projected to go down. I saw the number at 5.88. Reeves just said 5.82, but it's going to be under 6%. And if it's not repealed, it'll be continue to be at 7.15%. So I think when you're having a discussion with voters, the key is saying that property taxes will be higher if this passes, if the repeal passes in November. And I think it's important to know that the impact won't just be on homeowners, it'll also be on people that live in apartments. Obviously, the cost is shifted to people that are in apartments because the owner of the apartment has to pay this amount too. And obviously we're in a recession, which I think has a big impact on this discussion, both why the legislature moves so quickly at the end of session in order to try to do this, and also the response that voters might have given the fact of what everybody's going through right now. I think there's no doubt there's a real problem. Reeves pointed out a lot of the issues and how things have been impacted. I think it also is very much based in certain localities, rural Colorado, Western Slope, Eastern Plains, some other areas where they don't see their home values going up as much as people on some parts of the Front Range, and they also don't have the same amount of commercial property as other areas, which obviously impacts local governmental functions. That there has to be adjustments made, either raising mill levies or having less of certain things. I think there's no doubt that there's an actual problem. I think there was other solutions to straight repeal that were being discussed by legislators, including a regional approach, which I think would make a lot more sense. Also, this doesn't change the commercial assessment rate. And I think a lot of the arguments that you saw from legislators who were passing this was the big burden that the current system has on businesses. Well, the assessment rate stays at 29% for now. And I think that's, I want to talk a little bit about the uncertainties that could come after this is repealed. But saying that there was no give, there was no cut to the commercial assessment side to say this is actually going to benefit businesses. And so I think that was something that, the regional approach, the fact that there was no cut to the commercial side, I think a lot of that argument, falls flat with some people. But I think there's a couple groups and businesses. It's an interesting approach looking at what do they think will happen after the repeal happens, right? So you have one group of people, one of your former Speaker of the House from up there, Dickie Lee Hullinghorst, who thinks that business taxes will go down, that the assessment rate will eventually, powerful lobbyists at the Capitol who will get legislators to say businesses need a break, and that will go down, and the burden, remains on homeowners. And so she's opposing. I have other people I'm talking to that are on the business side that say decoupling, taking, residential and commercial side and splitting them up provides a target for voters to go after the commercial side even more and say, look, businesses should be paying even more than they are now. There's some people who think that could be a target, given that right now they're together. You can't, make that approach, that businesses could see a hit. I think there's also and it could just be the cynical side of me, but I'm concerned that at some point the legislature is going to say, you know what, we've played under this for years. We've thought that you can't raise residential rates, and you can't do it because of TABOR. That TABOR says that you can't raise it if it's a substantial policy change. And I'm just worried that might get tested out in the courts, given that Gallagher was first, TABOR came afterwards. That's the assumption we've been under for a long period of time. But I do think that it's possible that the legislature says, you know what, we're going to try to do this and make a court stop us and say that it's a substantial policy change. But I think one of the larger issues is the legislature decided to do this, out of their concern about localities somewhat, but they could have done that at any point. It's when it impacted their budget, right? So the budget was cut this year, and they backfill a lot of the education dollars into localities. And I think that the education funding formula needs to be changed before any kind of talk of repealing Gallagher. There are certain localities that have more money than others, and they have lower mills, and you have wealthier districts who are getting subsidized by the state. And so this assumption that we just have to backfill all the money to all these districts, I think should be reassessed before we talk about repealing Gallagher. I think there has to be an education funding formula change. You look at the ballot language of this repeal. It's something I talked to you all last year about with CC, but I just think it's misleading and confusing. I think the fact that saying that the property rates won't go up, I think you can make a case for that, but given that the assessment rate is going to be higher, and then the whole laundry list of things that could be impacted by it. If you saw the Gallagher repeal was on the ballot years ago, I believe it was 2003, lost 78-22, but you look at that ballot language was very different and very less biased than this one is. But I've also seen polling on this, and I think it's a huge uphill climb for the proponents of it, even with that ballot language. I think you look at the confusing nature. Obviously, Gallagher is very confusing. So this whole, the ballot language is this long. Back when they did in 2003, it was much shorter. But I think they're trying to push voters in a certain direction. I just don't know if they're going to agree with it. And so I think when it comes down to it, most Coloradans continue to pay more in property taxes than they did the year before. That's the case for me. That's the case for a lot of people I talk to. And, because of the housing price increase that happens there, and we've had more mill levies placed, I know, in Douglas County here, in Jefferson County. I mean, there's constantly mill levies being passed on the local level. But we're in the middle of a recession, and I think Coloradans are going to want to see that 5.88 assessment rate and then make adjustments after that based on some different approach than a straight repeal of Gallagher.
Thanks, Michael. We do have a question from Brian Copham, the co-chair of our policy committee. He asks, was the original determination that 45-55 split was the right balance made based on opinion or empirical data? If empirical, what were the indicators used?
Reeves, you can take that one. I know.
It was just, the bill was proposed in 1982, and at that time, residential property constituted 45% of all statewide valuation, and all it did was freeze it. So it wasn't selected, it's just what it was at the time.
Thanks, Reeves. Other questions for Reeves or Michael on the Gallagher amendment? We will pivot to the paid medical and family leave discussion, but because over the course of the discussion, additional things may come up, and so thanks to both of you for sticking with for the second part of our discussion, and then we'll ask for final questions once our speakers conclude. So with that, I would like to introduce Karen Moldovan and Deborah Brown of Good Business Colorado. They will kick things off, and then Christy Pollard will provide her perspective as well. Karen, I think you were gonna kick off the comments.
Yes.
From Good Business Colorado.
Thanks so much, Lori. So hopefully I've shared my screen there. Hopefully folks can see it.
Yep.
But yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about the ballot we're all going to be looking at in November, and I really appreciated the Gallagher conversation as well. So folks may have heard some previous conversations about the creation of a statewide paid family and medical leave program. The legislature has debated it multiple years in a row, and it has not passed at the legislature. So this is the first time that voters are going to have an opportunity to weigh in directly this November. So we just think it's important to kind of talk through the proposal and what it means, particularly for our business community. So paid family medical leave, I think there can be some confusion, especially since we're having these conversations at the federal level and emergency rules around paid sick days and a lot going on right now. But paid family and medical leave is a little bit different. This is specifically compensation for time off from work due to major life events. So not, the cold or the headache or that sort of thing, but where longer term leave is needed. Folks typically go to maternity or paternity leave. So something really happy like the birth of a child, but where we have seen these programs be successful in other states, they're inclusive of serious illness or something really difficult, like an employee or one of their family members having cancer or being in a traumatic accident or that sort of thing. So we are looking at this longer term leave. So it's not the same as sort of your paid time off or vacation that you may offer or paid sick days that you may offer. This is for those more serious events that don't happen every single day, but certainly are a part of life, right? And a part of something that we all have experienced one way or the other. And we know it's a reality. So how the program will work, if Colorado voters do approve it, this would create a statewide program. And this would be a program that's administered through a state entity like the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, or CDLE. The way it would work is that both employees and employers would pay small monthly premiums. So I sort of think about, how unemployment insurance is created in the state. So you would pay into, it's a similar type of concept. You would pay a small monthly premium, and we'll talk about what those costs would look like. As the ballot measure is written, there would be a small business premium exemption. So businesses with fewer than 10 employees would be exempt. The employer would be exempt from paying that portion of the premium. Their employees, though, would still be covered and would be able to get access to the program and those benefits, which we think is really important for leveling the playing field with the small business community. It can be really difficult to retain and keep top talent when small businesses aren't able to offer the same type of benefits that some larger employers are. So the statewide program would be accessible to everyone, but our smallest businesses wouldn't be have quite the same financial burden. And really the benefit of this is if you do have an employee who needs that paid family and medical leave, the employer doesn't have to pay a full salary. We've talked to small businesses that have felt like just understanding the financial situation that they had to somehow come up with a full salary even while somebody was on leave. Or oftentimes what happens is there's just no pay or salary offered at all. So the way the program, kind of some of the key components, is that it would offer up to 12 weeks of leave. One thing that we do know from other states, even if that is the maximum allowed, from other models, people don't always take that, right? They'll typically take what their doctor or medical professional is advising. There can be some ability to extend it for qualifying pregnancy or childbirth complications that just really require that extra time. If businesses are already offering paid family medical leave, which we know we have a lot of great employers who are able to do that in Colorado, they can keep their plan, their private plan. It is going to need to meet the minimum requirements of the state plan, but we see a lot of other models in other states where that's worked just fine. All workers would be eligible for the leave after they've earned a certain amount of wages. So it's $2,500, which is the same that is set in place for our unemployment insurance program. After 180 days of employment, their job would need to be protected. So that's a mechanism that's in place because we don't want anyone to ever be afraid to take the medical leave that they absolutely need for their health and wellness because they're afraid they're going to lose their job. So there will be some protections saying that, you know what, if you need to take this leave due to your health condition, then you'll have the same or comparable job when you get back. The premium collection would begin in January 2023, but the benefit would not be starting to be accessible to be paid out until January 2024. So the big questions that we want to be sure we have spend some time to talk through is what is this going to cost your business? As I mentioned earlier, for 10 employees or less, the employer would be exempt from paying into that premium. As I said, their employees are still going to be covered though. For businesses that have more than 10 employees, it would be a 50-50 contribution split. So the contribution, that amount with the program would start at 0.9% of an employee wage. So that equals out to 0.45% of a wage. That would be the rate for when the premiums begin to be collected and during the first year of administration. The measure does say that amount may be adjusted in 2025 and beyond, looking at different solvency factors. The state has done a lot of different financial modeling, solvency modeling. However, there will be language that the rate cannot exceed 1.2% of a wage. And when we look at other states, most other states are underneath that, or all of them are underneath that. What does this look, right? Because those numbers can feel a little bit nebulous. So we have some breakdowns. So you can sort of think about, you could kind of pick a line on this to take a look at it. So say you have an employee that's making $50,000 a year. That would be the weekly portion. Again, this would be, say, a business that has more than 10 employees. The employer portion would be $4.33 a week. So the annual would be $225 for that employee that's making $50,000 a year. And I will say, when we've talked to other businesses about this and what this would be able to offer to them, folks kind of sometimes start thinking about people who are able to have a short-term disability policy in place. And we're a small organization as well. We only have 3 full-time staff at the moment. And we compared with our short-term disability program and what it provided and what it cost compared to this. A lot of businesses see this being much more cost-effective than some other policies they may be purchasing that actually don't provide a very generous benefit and are sort of complicated and actually pretty expensive at the end of the day. Oh, excuse me, my screen just switched on me. Sorry about that. So we also have the maximum allowable premiums on the right column, because as I mentioned, the rates could be adjusted, but there is a ceiling to where they could be adjusted. So you can see the numbers that we're looking at when you look at the benefit and the fact that the employer would not have to pay wages. They would tap in to this fund to be able to compensate, so their employer could take care of a baby, could take care of their health. A lot of folks really do see the cost benefit analysis of that. A component of the program, the way it's been built, and this is similar to other states, Washington State, for example, fairly recently passed a program. It is a progressive wage replacement model, recognizing that some of our lowest wage workers have the most difficulty being able to access and take leave. So you can see that depending on what the weekly wage is, so somebody, if their weekly wage is $500 a week, you know, they have a new baby that they have to care for, they would get a higher 90% sort of reimbursement through the state program for their weekly benefits. And that number does look a little bit different on that progressive scale. So I think I got through a lot of content pretty quickly. So that's why we did want to share our contact information. And of course, we're very happy to discuss further and take any questions.
Great, thanks, Karen. I did, we do have a couple of questions in the queue, and certainly I would encourage others, if you have questions, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll find the Q&A area, and so you can ask them there. How is family defined in the ballot measure?
That's a great question. I should pull up the exact language so I have it. So I don't want to. It's fairly long. It's 16 pages, so I don't want to misquote it. It is a fairly comprehensive definition of family, because we know that family looks different for people. So it's not you know, the tightest version of a nuclear family. And somebody hypothetically could be able to request this leave to take care of even an extended family member if need be.
Thanks, Karen. For businesses with less than 10 employees, does the employee still pay in?
My understanding is yes, the employee would still pay in. Again, the wages are, the premium portions are set at those, would start at that 0.45%. So it's fairly low, but the employer would not.
The employer does have the option to pay all or a portion of their employees' contributions, whether they have more than 10 employees or under 10 employees as well.
Thanks for that clarification, Deborah. What are thoughts on how protected jobs would be performed during a 8 to 16 week absence?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we've talked to a lot of small businesses about. And I know that it can be, that is a piece that folks really get some heartburn about. So I can't pretend that we have all the answers. You know, what I can say is that in states where we've seen this, businesses of all sizes are not reporting sort of a negative impact to their business or their business model. A lot of times, folks, our businesses will say, business owners, they care about their employees, and you know, if their employee or their child has cancer or has a complicated pregnancy and needs the time, we're more often to hear like, you know what, we will do everything we can to hold that job because this is a valued employee and the cost of turnover is actually more difficult for us. So we would rather hold this job for 8 weeks. You know, it might be tough. We might have to shift. We might have to move things around. We might have to bring in a temp help. But it's better for us to be able to hold that job, to get back an employee instead of having to rehire, retrain, deal with the really expensive cost of turnover. So that's something that we do consistently hear, and we hear that in places where this program has been implemented as well. And I think what I would also say is, even with the creation of this program, the reasons why people need it are not new, right? People have been having babies and taking care of babies for a long time. And unfortunately, people have gotten really sick for a while. And businesses have been able to adapt and to think creative and to keep business going. This program doesn't, you know, add new reasons that people need paid family and medical leave. It just gives employers a way to be able to afford it through this statewide scaled out premium, so it's not all out of their business pockets.
Thanks, Karen. Another question: who administers the program? Is this a new state department?
My understanding is it wouldn't be an entirely new department. I think that this would fall under the bandwidth of the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. So it might require, you know, a new section, some new staffing, some new administrators, certainly. But, you know, we have qualified state agencies to be able to take on this work. But yes, there would be some new administrative and oversight and implementation roles and responsibilities for the state.
Thank you. And then how does the ballot measure compare to the recommendations of the state task force that studied the policy last year?
That's a great question. Gosh, I have not done a side-by-side analysis. The task force voted on like 18 different policy components, and there were some that were unanimous, some where there were some conflicting opinions. I think in general, I think it's very consistent of what the task force did recommend at the end of the day. They certainly were recommending the sort of social insurance program type of model with these types of premium rates, with the progressive wage replacement, with some of the job protection components. This time frame for leave seemed reasonable. The same sort of amount of time or eligibility pieces are similar. So this is really built off of a lot of research that our state has done and what we're seeing working in other states.
Thanks, Karen. At this point, we don't have additional questions, and so we'll turn it over to Christy Pollard of Catalyst Public Affairs. Christy, I know you have comments to make, and if you want to also circle back on any of the questions that were raised most recently and provide additional context, please feel free to do that as well.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to present today. And it's nice to see you, Karen and Deborah. I'm sure we'll probably see a lot of each other over the course of these next couple of weeks. So again, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this really important issue. I'm going to pull up my slide deck here real quickly. And let's see here. Great. So we are here today to visit with you all about Initiative 283. As Karen mentioned, this is an initiative that is before the Secretary of State. They've turned in over 205,000 signatures, and we are awaiting the certification of that, but we have every reason to believe that it will be on this November ballot. And it is a very important issue that we, as residents and as small business owners and employers and employees, take into consideration. So let me tell you a little bit, and I don't want to belabor any of the points, but want to talk a little bit about the initiative. Amendment 283 actually is a new $1.3 billion tax increase that does create a new department. The initiative does authorize the creation of a new department and the appointment of a new director to run this new state-run insurance program. 50% of that $1.3 billion will come directly from the paychecks of the employees. The other 50% will come from the employer, as articulated earlier. This particular program, employers and employees will pay into this government-run insurance program through a deduction in their paycheck, similar to a FICA tax. So when you get your paycheck, you'll see that percentage taken out on that. And employers and employees will pay into that regardless of whether they take that benefit or not. And it allows eligible employees to take up to 16 weeks. The 16 would be eligible for complications in a pregnancy. And it does, the initiative does expand the terminology around family and who is eligible to be cared for as part of this paid leave. It does expand it to include not only family that is biological, marriage, partnership, but it also uses the terminology of being able to care for someone that the employee has a unique special bond. So we are concerned about that definition because it is nowhere in statute, and it is left to this new division director to determine what that special bond might be. The cost of this $1.3 billion tax increase, again, comes from a payroll premium. That is the language that is used in the initiative. And a premium is language that is used regularly with insurance. However, insurance in most cases is something that you and I will choose. We will choose the vendor that we will utilize. And what this actually is this is a tax. This is a payroll tax that is going to come out of an employee's paycheck, again, regardless of whether they will pay, whether they will take the leave or not. A dual income family that is making $110,000 will pay into this program $1,000 per year at the beginning. And $1,000 is real money. That's grocery money. That is money for school clothes. That is money for a variety of different things that families are regularly having to pay. And I would argue it's no surprise to any of us that we are in the midst of a recession. We are in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, and none of these budgetary issues are coming easy to any of us right now. Again, the funding comes 50-50 from the employer and the employee through a deduction in their paycheck. It starts at 0.9% of the employee's wages, and it can grow up to 1.2%. But you and I will not have any say in whether it grows to 1.2%. Whomever that individual is that will be running that new division, they will be able to make that determination as to when it goes up to 1.2%. Another example, an employee making $75,000 per year will pay that tax of $675 a year. And when it increases to 1.2, that tax will grow to $900. This is the slide. I believe you may have seen it on Karen's slide. This is straight out of the fiscal impact that was done by Legislative Council. You can see again the ranges of what the annual wage is, what the employee will pay, as well as the employer. Again, these are real monies. These are dollars that families are having to decide every single day how they're going to expend, and this initiative will require that it be deducted out of the paycheck. There will be no decision point in that for the employer or the employee. Let's talk a little bit about the bureaucracy that is created as a part of this initiative. Again, this initiative does authorize the creation of a new department, division, whatever they're going to call it. And it authorizes up to 197 new government employees. So this is not a small operation. This is a sizable operation. The person that is designated as the director of this new division, department, will have the unprecedented authority to increase this tax at their discretion from 0.9 to 1.2%. Again, you and I, as small business owners or as employees, will not have any say in this. And I would argue, as you look at the fiscal impact, it's not an if, but a when for this program to actually be able to maintain itself. They are going to have to increase it to the 1.2 for it to be to be able to survive. Again, these revenues are not subject to TABOR, so again, voters will have no say in how these monies are collected. The other thing that I want to point out, and I think this is a really important point, we talk a lot about the fact that all employees should have the ability to have paid family medical leave, except this measure specifically exempts local governments, which includes cities, counties, school district, towns, and other local governments. And it's because they can't afford it. So again, I would ask the question, if they can't afford it, if our local governments can't afford it, how can we expect that our small businesses and our employers and employees that are coming out of a recession, hopefully soon, how do we know that they can afford it? And here's the reality. We are all having tough times. We have a lot of restaurants that are still struggling to keep their doors open, waiters and waitresses that still have not had the ability to go back to work in as full-time a manner as possible. We still have businesses that are operating at 50% or less. The reality is, for a benefit like this to be valuable, people actually need stable employment before it actually becomes a value proposition. So I would question, is now the right time for this particular initiative? Families and different groups all over the state of Colorado and all over the world are struggling. And I don't believe that now is the time to be asking them to deduct more from their weekly paycheck. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. We do have some questions coming in, and just a reminder for others who might have questions, please do use the question and answer function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Are nonprofits exempt from payment?
No, nonprofits are not exempt. The only time that they would be considered exempt from the employer portion would be if they had 10 or less employees. But again, the employee would still have to pay into that, not the employer. But no, nonprofits are not exempt.
Thanks, Christy. Aren't local government entities often the largest employer in the community?
Yes, absolutely. I know a lot of you from my previous life as the CEO of the Jefferson County Economic Development Corporation, and our largest employer in Jefferson County is the Jefferson County School District, and this specifically exempts them from this measure.
Thanks. Are a portion of revenues used for the administrative overhead? If so, are there caps on percentage of admin costs relative to revenue?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know that I can get into the weeds on that one. I know that it does go to the administration of the program, but I am not sure if there are caps on what would be allowed to go to overhead and administration versus the actual program. So I apologize, but I can see if I can find that and share it with the group.
Thanks. What happens now to a woman who doesn't have this benefit when she has a baby? What are her options?
I'm sorry, say that one more time. I apologize.
Yeah, what happens now to a woman who doesn't have this benefit when she has a baby? What are her options?
That's a great question. So under federal law, the Family Medical Leave Act requires employers to give all employees the ability to take leave. It does not have to be paid leave, however. That individual does have the option if she has PTO that she can save up to be able to apply towards that. I would also offer that there are a number of employers across the state that do offer very generous leave options for moms when they are having their babies. But the federal family medical leave program is really the one that addresses the ability for moms to be able to take that time off work, to be able to bond with their babies, and it does require that their jobs would be available to them when they come back.
The only thing I would add to that is, of course, as you mentioned, FMLA is unpaid per the mandate, but it doesn't apply to small businesses that employ fewer than 50 people. So oftentimes women or, anyone who is having a child or adopting a child or caring for a child doesn't have access with small businesses.
Also, lack of access to leave is one of the greatest drivers of public service utilization. So if you lose your job, lose your income, you're more likely to need the public benefit and safety net programs, and that's how they make ends meet.
Thanks, Deborah. Next question. Your slides say the employee will pay the tax, such as $675 on a $75,000 salary, or the two-income earner family will pay $1,000 on an income of $110,000. Why be misleading about this? The tax is split between employer and employee.
That is a great comment, and I would argue that these will come out of the employee's paycheck. And I'm pulling my slide back up here, but I believe those numbers are directly from the employee. The employer would pay the same 50% on the other side.
Thank you. Are all divisions of the state government required to comply?
State government is not exempt under this particular initiative. It is restricted to local governments, and local governments are defined in statute as cities, counties, towns, school districts, special districts, so your metropolitan districts, fire districts, all of those would be considered local governments.
You pointed out that now is not the right time due to the pandemic. Do you believe there is a right time?
That is a really good question. I think that a program like this is too rich for any time, but I would argue that particularly now, when we are in the midst of a worldwide pandemic and recession, now is definitely not the right time.
Great. And then last question, here it is 429. How many cities or local governments in Colorado already offer this type of benefit?
You know what? I don't know that any cities or local governments, I don't know that I can answer that question. Perhaps the proponents might be able to. I am not aware of any cities or local governments that have a paid leave that is different than like family medical leave, federal family medical leave.
Karen, Deborah, any additional comments on that?
Actually, Boulder County has a pretty exemplary program.
Great. Thank you.
And I will say, with the public comment that came in when the task force was happening, there were, frankly, local governments sort of on both sides, but local governments who did talk about their robust policies that they were able to offer. Absolutely.
Thanks, Karen. We don't have additional questions at this time. I just want to do one more call out, although we are at the hour mark. If there are additional questions for Reeves, Michael, Christy, Karen, or Deborah, now's the time. If you are, walking later this evening and think of a question, certainly they've provided contact information, but you can also check in with us at the Boulder Chamber. We're happy to make connections for our attendees who think of additional questions or additional pieces afterwards. With that, thank you very much to our speakers, Christy, Karen, Deborah, Reeves, and Michael. You provided incredible information. These are really complicated issues that we're wrestling with at the state level, and we so appreciate your helping us decipher them and provide additional context. I also want to thank our sponsors, our presenting sponsor, Google, our gold sponsors, WW Reynolds Companies and Zayo, and our silver sponsor, BTC. Your support is so greatly appreciated. As we wrap up, I want to thank our attendees for joining us this afternoon. I hope you learn more about these initiatives and feel like you're better informed. And most importantly, please vote this fall. Voting is a foundation of our democracy and a privilege not afforded in many countries throughout the world. Thank you for your engagement with this important civic role. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.